can be confused with those of other common digestive conditions like irritable bowel syndrome, Crohn's, and celiac disease.
So getting to the right diagnosis meant being more open with my doctor about the severity of my symptoms and how often they were happening.
But there's good news. EPI is manageable, so don't wait any longer. Use the symptom checker at identifyepi.com and schedule a visit or call with your doctor to ask, could I have EPI?
Sponsored by AbbVie.
What if being in recovery from a mental or substance use disorder was something we proudly showed the world? Millions of people are in recovery, sharing hope and support with family, friends, and community. Join the Voices for Recovery. For confidential information for mental and substance use disorders, call 1-800-662-HELP. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
All too often, the media are ignoring the everyday heroics of our policemen and women. Well, that changes on News Nation. Dan Abrams and his live PD sidekick Styx are back in prime time on Dan Abrams Live, weeknights at 8, 7 Central on News Nation.
Team Hochberg Traffic Center time and Julie Cronus.
Inbound Edens from Cicero to Montrose, slow traffic. Lake Cook to Montrose, 17 minutes. Kennedy inbound is slow from 190 to Lawrence, and then a delay from Irving Park all the way into the Byrne Interchange. O'Hare into the Byrne Interchange, 46, 17 from the junction. And going outbound to the airport, that's going to run you 26 minutes. Eisenhower inbound heavy from St. Charles to the Tri-State, and then Wolf to Ridgeland. Coming in 390 to the post office is 43. And if you're going outbound to the post office, it's 21. Stevenson inbound is heavy from Veterans Memorial to the county line, and then heavy from First all the way to Kedzie. 355 to Lakeshore Drive is 41 minutes. And that's traffic. I'm Julie Cronus on AM 560, The Answer.
Worried about basement flooding? Time to call Permaseal, 800-421-SCAL. Chicago's Morning Answer continues next. AM 560 Weather Center forecast. Clouds and sunshine with a high of 84. Right now, 62. Next news, 7:30. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
From the Matrix Home Solutions Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.
Listen to AM 560 The Answer online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, and on TuneIn, iHeart, and on Odyssey. This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560 The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. So last hour in our conversation with Rich Lowry referenced the clip of the week from DHS Secretary Mayorkas, which was we have to investigate the Border Patrol based on what people believe could be true rather than what we know is true, which is just a remarkable position for a former federal prosecutor to take. The quote of the week from the Three Blind Mice is our the three little kids, the hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil, as KT McFarland calls Millie, Mackenzie, and Austin. The quote of the week from them came from Austin under questioning from Tom Cotton when they were before that Senate Armed Services Committee. And this is after both Millie and Mackenzie essentially said their position was keep a small footprint of troops, 2,500 troops in Afghanistan for the purposes of ensuring a smooth and safe evacuation of those that need to be evacuated, starting with American citizens. And Cotton then turned to Secretary of Defense Austin, General Austin, and asked him if it was true.
President Biden last month in an interview with George Stephanopoulos said that no military leader advised him to leave a small troop presence in Afghanistan. Is that true?
Senator Cotton, I believe that, well, first of all, I know the president to be an honest and forthright man. And secondly...
It's a simple question, Secretary Austin. He said no senior military leader advised him to leave a small troop presence behind. Is that true or not? Did these officer and General Miller's recommendations get to the president personally?
Their input was received by the president and considered by the president, for sure.
Yeah,
wow.
I love it. General Austin does a great Mark Antony impersonation. Joe Biden is an honorable man. I mean, it's right out of Julius Caesar.
Well, it's either Biden lied or they're lying under oath. All three of those people.
For more on this, please be joined by the aforesaid Katie McFarland, former First Deputy National Security Advisor to President Trump, author of Revolution, Trump, Washington, and We the People. KT, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
It's always a pleasure and an honor to be with you.
Yeah.
Who's telling the truth?
Joe Biden is an honorable man, KT, says General Austin.
Look, what I found even more terrifying was I went back and looked at the statement that President Biden gave Stephanopoulos. He said, all my generals agreed. I mean, there was nobody who disagreed that I remember, that I recall.
Right.
So either Joe Biden is lying, or the generals are lying, or there's a third possibility, which he says, I don't remember. And frankly, I find that even more terrifying because this is the most important military decision of his presidency. And he doesn't remember. That's scary man land.
Did you have the occasion, when you were in the government, did you have the occasion to interact with Milley or Mackenzie?
Not Mackenzie, yes, Milley. And Milley, always struck me as someone who had a supreme confidence in his own ability and intelligence, but with very little reason to do so.
Wow. Has he done anything successful?
Not to my knowledge.
Did you return his copy of White Fragility that he let you borrow?
No, I mean, you have to remember that those three little kids, or, the three line brats who were up there speaking, these are the guys who are responsible for not just the fiasco of the withdrawal, but for 20 years of a failed military effort. Each one of those generals had a position in Afghanistan, and each one of those generals had gone up time and again to Capitol Hill and trotted out, just a little more money, just a little more time, just a few thousand more Americans stationed in Afghanistan, and we're going to lick this, or we're going to succeed, or we're going to prevail. I mean, really?
Well,
if you knew, you must have known. You were on the ground. You must have known what was going on there. Even General, the one you didn't hear from that you really want to hear from, General Miller, who was the one general who's on the ground now, who said exactly what was going to happen, that it would all collapse very quickly. Really, you didn't know. Why were you doing this for 20 years? Why were you putting American men and women's lives in peril? Why were you costing $1 trillion? Why were you sacrificing American credibility? What did you think you were doing? Were you doing it just long enough so that you could get another star on your shoulder and maybe retire and then go take your uniform off and become a defense contractor and become a lobbyist? I mean, I think those are the questions that I need to add. Not only President Biden and the colossally failed foreign policy and terrible situation that we're now in, but the other thing that bothers me is their sort of ruthless cynicism of, this is going to fade from the headlines. There are no reporters there. The story's going to go away. Or we don't want to lie under oath because we can't lie under oath. These are the three generals. But the president, he's never going to be held to account. They think they're going to get away with it. The tragedy is, for the American people, what happens next as a result of Afghanistan is that we will be challenged in a very direct and formidable way by China within the year, and that nobody gets away from.
Well, and then also too on the way out, we have 13 soldiers killed, and that seemed to be missing from that Senate Armed Services Committee. That fact, and then the fact that we killed 7 innocent children along with others in a drone strike that we did not get the ISIS-K leader. But is any of those 3 stooges or the 3 blind mice, are any of them going to lose their job over that?
No. That's the tragedy. I mean, maybe somebody will retire nicely, but nobody will be held accountable. And that's the other thing that's upsetting, is that there's a Marine lieutenant colonel who spoke out last month. He did a short little video, YouTube video.
We played it.
And he said, I'm putting my career on the line. I'm putting everything I've ever worked for my whole life on the line because I think people need to be held accountable. And no one is being held accountable for this fiasco. As a result of that, the Marine lieutenant colonel, he was relieved of command the next day. And as the 3 generals, the 3 stooges, were up on Capitol Hill You know what they did to that Marine lieutenant colonel? They threw him in jail.
Put him in the brig. That's right. Yeah.
Put him in the brig and gave him a gag order, and are now going to bring him up on charges. They haven't announced what charges or when or how, but that's what happens if you question, if you even try to question and demand some answers from our leadership, our senior military leadership. There's something very wrong with the American leadership today. The woke generals, they're far more concerned with their political image and their presence and the next job they're going to get than they are with defending the United States and keeping Americans out of harm's way.
It also speaks to this this cultural problem of accountability for subordinates and no accountability for superiors. This basically two legal regimes, one for Milley and McKenzie and Austin, and another for that Marine Lieutenant Colonel you mentioned, and that's just sort of rife throughout the federal government.
It's one rule for thee, another rule for me, and it's, I think, what has spurred the national grassroots rebellion around the country that started in about 2015, elected Donald Trump, and remains to this day, of a Washington which is out of touch and feels that you work for them, not they work for you. Look at the spending that they're trying to do. It's all about keeping them in power. And I think it's a very dangerous, not just for American foreign policy and the economy, it's a real serious threat to American democracy.
Well, and also just going back to Afghanistan, I'm still not satisfied we have an understanding of American citizens, legal permanent residents, Afghan allies that are still there, that are in harm's way, what's being done to evacuate any remaining. Are there any remaining?
Well, we had 100 come into O'Hare last night.
I understand. It would seem to me, but you have this happening here and this happening there, but I don't have context. So where are we with the ongoing evacuation of people who need to be evacuated under fear of being murdered by the Taliban?
Well, let's just put that into two categories. One would be American citizens or green card holders. And the State Department mumbles that it's a couple hundred, but the generals admitted that it was in the thousands. So either they don't know or they're lying. And that's just the Americans. That's not counting the people, the Afghans who cooperated with us. And that's not even mentioning the third problem, which is in the shambolic, chaotic evacuation in the early days. There are a lot of Afghans who got out of Afghanistan who were not people who helped us. And we don't seem to know who they are. We don't seem to have biometric data. I've talked to people who are at the American bases where some of these Afghans are. They have no idea who these people are. And so it's not a surprise to anybody that there was a group of Afghan evacuees who had an assault against an American military, a soldier at one of the bases.
I mean, it's just a head shaker. I don't know what to say about it. One more topic on Milley with respect to his testimony. So the Bob Woodward book, he finally responded to the assertions about those two calls, one before the election, one after January 6th, to his Chinese communist counterpart. And I got to say, I mean, he was pretty specific about, I went through the chain of command. I enlisted Secretary of Defense Esper. There were 8 people on this call. I read out the call after the call was done and so on and so forth. I don't know. That seems to be his testimony would be easily confirmed or refuted by some of those individuals who were on those calls with him. If that's true, it sounds like, I hate to question a venerable journalist like Bob Woodward, but it sounds like maybe Bob didn't get his story straight.
Well, I know from personal experience that Bob Woodward plays fast and loose with the truth. But secondly, the Director of National Intelligence and the Deputy and the Acting Director of the CIA, Rick Grinnell and Radcliffe, have both come out. John Radcliffe have both come out and said, look, if Milley says he was responding to some Chinese threat, that the Chinese were thinking that we were about to attack them, so they were going to do some preemptive movement. That's why Milley felt necessary to go rogue.
Right.
The intelligence official said, we never saw anything like that. Our intelligence never said anything, military intelligence. So wherever Milley was getting, I think the far more likely explanation, look at the timeline of when Milley talked to Woodward. It was after the election. Milley knew, as did everybody in Washington, that the Biden people were firing anybody who had been appointed by President Trump. And Milley had a big problem. He was A, appointed by President Trump, and B, and the George Floyd riots, remember that famous picture of President Trump walking across Lafayette Square with a Bible in his hand? Well, right behind him was General Milley in his fatigues.
Mm-hmm.
General Milley had to do a lot of sort of backtracking with the Biden people so that he could keep his job. And so what perfect way to keep your job and to let the Biden people know, I'm not a Trump guy, I'm a Biden guy, is to say that he felt that he felt President Trump was mentally unstable, and so mentally unstable that Milley had to save the world from World War III by talking to the Chinese. And it worked. Milley has his job.
That's an interesting theory, and you're right. I mean, as we know, a lot of these generals are just dressed up politicians. I mean, they once upon a time they were rank and file and served our country honorably, and some obviously still do. But a lot of them turn out to be politicians like this that are playing angles for survival, like you're describing. That wouldn't be, that's not beyond the norm, I guess, in D.C.
Yep. It's a sad state of affairs, isn't it? That's why the American Revolution needs to happen, political revolution, to throw the bums out and to really change the direction of American domestic and foreign policy. These guys are not in charge. The Washington swamp doesn't rule us. We rule the Washington swamp. We just need to drain the swamp.
All right. One more topic we got to get to before we let you go, because there were aspersions cast on your character, Russiagate. And with the indictment that Durham handed down against the Clinton East attorney, and more subpoenas going out and suggestions from people who have a pretty good handle on what prosecutors do, like Andy McCarthy, that there's more to come. Of all people, I just think you'll enjoy this. Russell Brand, former Mr. Katy Perry, the comedian. Russell Brand took to YouTube, in part using Glenn Greenwald's reporting from his Substack, and had this to say.
It seems like years ago that we were hearing that Trump was colluding with Russia, that he wouldn't have won the election without Russia, that his whole presidency was a kind of Putin plot. Well, there's now serious evidence that it was the Clinton campaign and Hillary Clinton acolytes that were directly involved in the generation of what has proven to be a conspiracy. Untrue. Think about how much media you watched. Me, a person who I would think, broadly speaking, is from the left, a liberal, certainly not a Trump supporting Republican, with respect to those of you that are, I find myself in awe, gobsmacked, flabbergasted and startled by these revelations that Russiagate was a Democratic conspiracy.
Are you starting to feel at least a little bit vindicated?
Gobsmacked, that's a great word. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. KT McFarland, former First Deputy National Security Advisor to President Trump. The book, Revolution, Trump, Washington, and We the People. KT, thanks as always.
Thank you. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The more you listen, the more you'll know. This is Chicago's Morning Answer. Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
You have faced uncertainty and anxiety, and now your retirement is looming. You might be asking yourself, did I put enough away? Will I have to pay a lot of taxes? Will my spouse be okay if something happens to me? Total Clarity Wealth Management can offer answers and help alleviate your anxieties. With a professional team of financial advisors and CPAs, they can show you the way to financial readiness and keep you on track. Their philosophy is built on solid relationships and trust, with access to expertise in tax